Mixing with Mike, plugin of the week comes from Solid State Logic. It's the SSL 4KG. This is the third analog emulation channel strip that SSL has come out with. They've already come out with the SSL 4KB, the 4KE, and now the 4KG. So moving up the ladder, takes us into the late 1980s, circa 1987 when they introduced this. And it was an update from the E-Series console, offering a bit more mid-range presence, I would say, a little bit more punch and clarity than the warmer E-Series or warmer B-Series console. And it was received somewhat well overall. Interestingly, there were people who loved the console. I was one of those. And there were many engineers who preferred the E-Series console. And this actually kind of plays into the design, and I'll kind of dig into this as we kind of go through it. So in 1987, they come out with this console. It basically replaces the E-Series console. And essentially, what happens is studios start taking it in, and it becomes sort of a classic sound for a lot of hip-hop records, for a lot of club records. Basically a very radio-sounding console. One of the primary differences was in the EQ itself, and this was the one thing that sort of split a lot of the engineering community into an E-Series camp and a G-Series camp. So much so that they actually used, some console studios actually offered an E-Series EQ, the black knob, into the G-Series console because it actually fit into the exact same card slot on the motherboard. So you could actually swap them out. And many studios actually, instead of having a full console with the G-Series EQ, would have half of it with E, half of it with G, and that would give the people who liked the other the ability to use the EQ that they wanted. There was no EG switch. This came later, actually, in the J and K series consoles, which actually added an EG switch, although it wasn't exactly an E or a G series EQ, not the same components, but it mimicked the characteristics of them. The primary difference being is that the EQ had what was called a constant Q characteristic on the parametric EQs. And what you had was a variable Q characteristic on the G series, meaning that as you boosted more, you got a wider boost area as you boosted more. And the E series sort of remained a bit more focused within the Q setting that you had. And this actually makes a very dramatic difference in the sound. You'll find that the G series is a much more present and more aggressive EQ would be the way to put it. There were many differences about this, and we'll kind of go over them with the an overview of the interface. But first, I just want to do like just a quick A/B, just so you kind of get a sense of what the sonic character of it is. So let's start off with that. I'll start with it in, and then A/B it out and in.
These algorithms really know me so well, I think I'd place the bet. I want everything they're advertising to me, even if I don't know it yet. And as I sit here by the fire, as our ancestors used to do, I can't help thinking I would give anything just to be so confused by the moon.
Right, so you could hear the immediate forward presence of it. And there's some real tricks to using the console. We'll go through some of the settings. First, I just kind of want to go over just an overview of the channel strip itself. We'll start with the input section. One of the cool things that they've done here is they've added in the preamp, right? So it gives you a preamp saturation that you could drive, and it will be automatically gain compensated. So you'll get the actual full effect of the preamp. Now, the original G series preamp was actually stepped, I believe, in 5 dB increments that were switched positions as you kind of went up and down. And but what they've done here is they've given you the variable version of that and then emulated the sonic characteristics of the saturation so you could drive it. They also added in an impedance control. Now, this was actually part of a hardware unit, the FX 383. G Series was an outboard mic preamp EQ, and this would give you variable setting on the ohms, and this would allow you to kind of take a sound, and we'll play around a little bit with this, and tonally color it by changing the impedance, right? So that comes in. It only works on the mic preamp. If you don't have the preamp in, none of this works, and you're just going through the input trim, which is just a normal line input trim. Interestingly, the original console itself, when you had the mic preamp and it's all the way downward position, would actually be +4 signal, line level, right? So they set it up in a way that you could actually patch into it with a line level signal and it wouldn't saturate. It would give you the exact same gain structure but a different sound. All right, so this was a big part of it, and this kind of plays into some of the cool saturation characteristics that you get with this. It's also a phase inversion here, normal stuff. High pass, low pass filter, you could place that in separately. The full EQ section. Now with the G series, one of the primary changes was they replaced the bell switch, which was here and here, right? That worked for the high mid and low mid frequency band. So that would, they switched it from the bell curve. The bell used to turn the high shelf and the low shelf into a parametric, a fixed parametric EQ, and they took that out and they replaced it with the ×3, which would give you an extended frequency response range instead of 7K up to 21K. And on the low end, if you hit the divide by 3, it would give you from 200 down to basically 67 hertz or so. And that actually ends up being a really, really cool feature because it allows you to set up a narrow Q, and there's a very cool secret there for the low end of a kick drum to get that narrow Q, nice tight boost, and that cranked all the way down, and I'll show you that. And so what you have are fixed shelving EQs for the top and the bottom when these high mid frequency and low mid frequency buttons there, right, without the bell curve. If you switch to the black knob, which gives you the E series EQ, then it goes back to the normal bell curve that you get here. So A-Bing back and forth can be a little bit tricky because if you're using the divide by 3 switch and then you switch to the black knob, it's not going to translate because this is now going to switch out, and instead of being 67 hertz, it's going to be 200, which will change the settings. So I will show you in some places where we can do an A-B so you can hear the differences in characteristic, and they're pretty stark, the differences. Otherwise, all of the other stuff is the same. High shelf, low mid band with the parametric, or high mid band with the parametric, low mid frequency, with the parametric, low frequency shelf. Filters, you could set the order of them here with the filter section, so this allows you to move the order. Now, generally speaking, the console actually would set up with filters first, typically. If there was a split button that would put them first after the preamp stage here, so that would be kind of a typical place to put them. Otherwise, by default, they would appear after the EQ, but part of the EQ section. But you can reset the order here, including putting the dynamics prior to all of this. And that sets your signal flow order, so you can decide whether you want the dynamics to be prior, right, to the EQ or after the EQ. And then if you want the filters after the dynamics, then you have to put it here. Okay, all right, so some of the basics there. That's the EQ. The compressor section is the G series compression. It's a bit different from the E series compression and the B series compression. The B series compression is more like the actual bus compressor for the console with stepped ratio settings, each with different knee controls. The E series had a warmer kind of sound to it. The G series compressor has a tighter sound to it. So I'm not exactly sure what that is. To me, it sounds like they tightened up the knee. of it, and that makes it a bit more aggressive sounding, just a little bit more focused in terms of its implementation. Fast attack setting gives you roughly about a 3 millisecond attack time. Slow setting is roughly about 30 milliseconds. There's some variation in there. A lot of these things are kind of cofactored by the content that's the program material that's feeding into it and all of that, but roughly that'll give you a good idea of what's going on. Otherwise, threshold, ratio, release, all kind of the normal stuff. The dynamics in puts both the gate and the compressor in the circuit. So the only way that you can avoid using the gate or expander is by having the range set at 0. Otherwise, it's always in the circuit. You can make an expander as opposed to a gate. Fast attack time is super fast. It's like 0.2 or 0.1 milliseconds, something like that. It's pretty fast. And the slow attack time is like 1.5 seconds or something. I haven't found as much use for gates in digital. One of the primary uses for it in the analog world was tape, getting rid of tape hiss. So people would regularly use gates or soft expanders on the returns of reverbs and things like that. Use it less so. I don't often feature it because mostly there's not anything particularly that special about them. To be honest. We have the output fader. Now, what they've done is they've actually emulated the VCA. Now, the VCA itself was a THAT 2002T Blue Can VCA. So this was the VCA circuit. So actually, the original version of the G Series console did not have moving faders, nor did the E Series or B Series console. It had a VCA fader. So no audio actually passes through the fader mechanism itself. There's a DC current which instructs an amplifier how much to add gain or take away gain from the signal that's feeding into it. The B Series console had the DBX Black Can VCA, which they emulated very well. Now, interestingly, a couple years after, or a few years after coming out with this console in '87, they released an update to the automation system called Ultimation, which integrated a moving fader system along with the VCA system. And I would say almost 100% of people who heard the non-VCA version, right, the moving fader version of the signal, preferred that over the VCA. What's interesting about it is actually the VCA sound actually kind of works better in the DAW than it did in the analog realm. So I kind of find that I prefer this using the VCA. It also gives you the ability to drive the VCA. So you have an output trim, which is digital, and you could drive the input gain, which would give you a little bit of subtle saturation in the VCA amplifier, and then you could pull the output gain to get yourself back to unity. There's also a way to connect into the 360. That's a separate software that allows you to set up all the channel strips that are put in the session on what looks like a mixing console. Really love that idea. You get the bypass for the whole channel strip itself. You'll see me using that a lot. Solo and cut. This sort of works within the 360 system, but it will cut other instances down the line, allowing you to solo without having to go to the DAW. There is a pan control for mono to stereo versions, or the stereo version. It'll become like a balance control. There's also a width control here. I'll get into some of these are not features. The pan control was obviously there on the channel strips, which were only mono. There weren't any channel strips that were stereo in the G Series line. There were in the E Series line, actually. There were stereo channel strips. At least I never saw any stereo on the G Series. So you have a width control, and that's an added feature. That's not actually part of the original design. There's also a sidechain listen feature. You can feed an external sidechain if your DAW allows for that. You could place the EQ on the console into the sidechain. All that can be done right here. And I will show you that as well. There's also an additional few settings down here. You have all the AB stuff, the undo, redo, the preset menu, right? So if you come up with a default setup, you could save that as a default setup. Obviously with the console strip normaled, but maybe you like a certain processing chain order and certain settings, high quality mode, which adds oversampling, all of that sort of stuff, the version number. Here, this is where you can take or change some of the basic settings of the way that it operates. So the analog VCA, if you don't like that, you can turn it off, right? So then it would run through normally without the VCA or the VCA amplifier kind of added in, the saturation there. The width mode here, when you use the width mode, you can apply it to low frequencies, high frequencies, or to the full spectrum. And then there's a cutoff here. So in other words, if you wanted to, for example, mono up low frequencies, you could set it for low, set this, say, to like 200 hertz or 250 or wherever you want. And then when you pull this to mono, it would mono up low frequencies. And if you do the high, then it would do everything above the selected frequency that you have set here, right? So that would just give you some control over that. And that can be handy for some things. There's an auto makeup gain that they place in. There was an auto makeup gain that was placed into the console itself. It never really worked. I think you needed about 6 dB of gain reduction to get something that closely emulated or 3 dB of gain reduction, which closely emulated something that might be Unity, but it was always louder, which always made it sound better. So the auto makeup here works a little bit better. It works better with the fast attack than it does with the slow attack. I'll say that. But you actually can have an auto makeup gain offset, right? So if you feel like it's always too loud based on the amount of gain reduction you're getting, you can adjust or compensate for that, and then store that as your default preset, and then that would show up with those settings every time. There's also a little question thing here. This will just allow every time you go over a feature, this would be the quick non-reading the manual way of finding out exactly what each setting does. And then here you can set your zoom level for the individual plugins, and that will kind of operate globally once you basically set it. I think I covered everything here. So maybe let's dig into some audio examples here. I'm going to bypass this and just kind of go, let's just start with the drums real quick, and then I'll start to dig into some of the settings here. Here's one thing, I'm just going to do this because this will be the easier way to kind of show it here, because I have this sort of on the drum bus here, just to show you what the preamp sounds like and kind of give you a little bit of a sense of driving it, and then using the impedance, variable impedance setting. Right, so that just gives you a bit ability to kind of tonally color, mostly warming up the sound. Here's the difference between the preamp setting just here. I'll kind of even leave this on, and then turning this off, which would go just to the simple line amp. Right, so you get a little bit of warmth out of this, and then obviously you can drive it and sort of mix it in accordingly. There are some other cool controls. This is just basically mid-side adjustment here. Control. Okay, so basically that just the width control there, just to kind of give you a sense of what that does. It can be handy for some things, just for some subtle adjustments. or even some major ones. Just to give you an idea of one of the things I was talking about with the divide by 3 thing here, just on the low end, this would be the basic trick here, and you'll see it on the kick drum itself, but this will exaggerate it. Right, and just get a sense for the low end or high frequency. Right, you could hear just how aggressive it sounds, even just by working the, just like simple, smaller boosts. And it gives you like, 22 dB of boost and attenuation on the parametric bands. I think like 20 dB. So it's a pretty aggressive EQ in terms of what it offers you. And then, of course, you get the E series EQ. So I imagine this was just basically ported over from the E series. And it's hard to compare them in this case, but I will show you in some other cases where I didn't use the divide by 3 switch. All right, so let me take this out of the equation here for a second, just kind of go through some of the basic settings. So this is one of the basic things that I do here with the low end of the kick drum. And you can kind of set the sort of tonal character or the size of that low end boost just with the simple width control, right? Right, so that 0.07 kilohertz, sort of a weird way to put it, is basically like 70 hertz. I think in actual measurements on a lot of the consoles, it goes down lower than that. It always sounded lower to me, like more towards 60 or 50 than it did towards 70. But it got that basic thing, and you could just really kind of decide like how tight you want the kick drum. And if you want that low mid dip, you just do it on the shelf. That sort of shelves everything down. Helps you with controlling some of the sub energy as well, and then you can kind of dial in with a real narrow Q on that kick drum. It's a technique I like to use when using like Pro Q3 or Pro Q4 or whatever the latest fab filter, any digital EQ, similar type of thing. And that mid-range, the mid-range boosts are just like really aggressive. Like you really hear it, and there's a lot of tonal color in there, and this used to drive some people crazy because it sounds very phasey as you're sort of sweeping through it. One of the other differences also with the shelving EQ is it has a little bit of a resonance to it. Has a little bit of dip at the beginning and a little bit of boost on the other side of the shelving part of it, so you get kind of a little bit of a resonance that didn't exist. The E-Series EQ was much smoother sounding, but it's nice to have that option in there as well. Similar type of approach with the snare drum, just kind of targeting more like 100 hertz. Same thing, using kind of the divide by 3 switch. Loads of presence that you can kind of dig out into it, particularly in the 5K range. And similar kind of things with toms, right? Focusing in on that fundamental. Okay. Let's kind of move on to something like the bass track here. This is something where the preamp and all of this kind of comes in really handy. And I want to demonstrate just one other thing here with the bass, which is driving the VCA circuit. right. And then this would be, so if I have this down, ooh, I could see it 4.5 dB. So I would bring this down about, that's plus 12, so maybe about 16 dB or so. Sorry, I tried to undo, but it has to go through a process there. And then I'll go back to this. Or I just have to go forward. Prefer that sound. Kind of went through a few too many steps here. All right. Just a little bit of a tighter sound that might actually work better in the context of the mix. Let's see.
These algorithms really know me so well, I think I placed the bet. I want everything they're advertising to me, even if I don't know it yet.
Right. One of the things that you can really dial in pretty aggressively are guitar tracks. So here, I'll switch over to the B setting here just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about, in particular with this sort of phasey filtering kind of sound, right? Really gives you just those two EQs and the way that they kind of go, it just it gives you this incredible tonal range just in terms of the way that you can just sort of sweep through guitar sounds. Almost like changing pickups on it. It has that same kind of feel to it, which is really great. And it's much harder to do with the E series EQ. There's something about this characteristic way that it sort of digs into the sound that I find very different and quite cool. Now, generally speaking, in most usage with the SSL consoles, E series, G series, generally speaking, people wouldn't do or make as their primary EQ working with vocals. Generally, that would be something you would bring in some other outboard gear as a way to kind of bring in like a different character or color or something that might stand out from sort of the rest of the rhythm section tracks, which might be primarily done with the console EQ. That said, it doesn't mean that it's awful sounding, but just to kind of point out that it's a bit aggressive, and sometimes if you're going for an aggressive vocal sound, that actually can be very handy. And if you're looking for a cleaner, more pure type of vocal sound, very natural type of vocal sound, this is probably not going to be the EQ for you. Just as a general kind of thinking about the way to approach the setup itself.
These algorithms really know me so well, I think I'd place the bet. I want everything they're advertising to me, even if I don't know it yet. And as I sit here by the fire, as our ancestors used to do. I can't help thinking I would give anything to still be so confused by the moon.
I also find it very helpful, and I've done this a lot, which is when you do an aggressive EQ, which is very easy to do, and this is to compress the signal after the EQ as a way to kind of help to glue the sound together, right?
These algorithms really know me so well, I think I'd place the bet. I want everything they're advertising to me, even if I don't know it yet.
It's sort of this principle that I found where you shred the sound and then you have something that sort of duct tapes it all back together. And that's what the compressor here is really, really good at. Now, I focused on the EQ because that's really the primary differences. The differences between the channel compressors are much more subtle. And it's also harder to kind of A/B the compressors in and out in a setup like this on multiple channels without, without kind of getting into, all kinds of deep dives on grouping and stuff like that. So I'm just going to do something here quick with the drums just to kind of show you one thing here. One being the fast attack. Let's just start with like a 4-to-1 ratio here and dial in maybe a faster release. Get something to kind of pump and breathe here a bit. Right. You also have a wet-dry control here, so you can kind of get pretty aggressive with this, And kind of just parallel in the amount that you need. That would be one way to approach it. Also, so that gives you a pretty aggressive sound on the attack, even for 3 milliseconds. Sounds definitely like a much harder kind of knee. Whereas with the slower attack time, you get something that allows the transient to act a bit more naturally. Right, so you get two basic settings there that actually offer quite a lot of flexibility, and they will sound different depending upon the program material. Obviously, with more transient-driven stuff, the fast attack, you'll hear the aggressiveness of it more than you might hear in other instruments. This is a really great emulation. I have yet to hear, this is the first G-Series emulation that I've heard that I've really felt acts and behaves exactly the way that I remember the G-Series console that I've done so much work on in hardware form. And nothing else that I've heard, they all fall short in different ways. And this to me has really captured the essence and the character, particularly in the EQ. There's a certain sonic characteristic that's kind of hard to describe that's captured just incredibly well here in this plugin. And so kudos to SSL for doing that. This plugin literally came out this morning, got the announcement, loaded it up, and then instantly put up a demo because I just love this console and have never been satisfied with the existing G-Series emulations that are out there, and so I never end up using them. And now I finally feel like I have one that I could use. And also, if you have an existing UF1 or any of the or UC1 or UF8, any of the hardware interfaces, then this is just sort of a perfect fit knob for knob match with all the settings and everything, and that's a bonus for those of you who have invested into that system, which is a really great one. Plugin of the week, Solid State Logic, SSL 4KB, a pleasant surprise. Hopefully they move on to the J and K series. Who knows? Let's see what happens next. Plugin of the week.